Hello and welcome to the webinar today. My name is Laura Rainsborough and I'm the Riverkeeper and CEO with Ottawa Riverkeeper. Bonjour tout le monde, moi je suis Laura Rainsborough. Je suis la Garde-rivière des Outaouais, puis aussi la directrice générale avec Garde-rivière des Outaouais. Many folks who are joining today are joining in from the Ottawa River watershed. Whose watershed is almost exactly the footprint of unceded, unsurrendered Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. And the Algonquin people remain the rights holders and the stewards of these lands and waters. Even when meeting digitally as we are today, it's really important to acknowledge the territory of this land. Le webinaire aujourd'hui se déroule principalement en anglais, mais nous sommes un organisme bilingue, donc vous pouvez poser vos questions en français si vous voulez, ou nous envoyer un courriel après l'événement, après le webinaire, pour demander une clarification. De plus, la plupart ou peut-être la totalité de ce que nous couvrons aujourd'hui est disponible sur notre site web dans les deux langues. So if you have questions in French, please feel free to ask them near the end, though the webinar today will be held in English. And so how will you ask your questions? I'm sure many of you have questions about road salt. It is a hot topic in this cold climate. And so there's a Q&A function in Zoom. You're welcome to use that to put your questions in there. And so you can find that at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can also add them in throughout the talk. We'll circle back to them near the end when we have time for a Q&A. So today I'm joined by a couple of colleagues. You'll later on meet Matthew Brocklehurst, who is our communications manager. He'll be handling the Q&A. And also our Director of Science and Policy, Larissa Holman. And of course, we have a guest speaker as well from the City of Ottawa, Chris Paquette, who will be introduced later. But we're all very pleased that you could join us today because, as I said, this is a hot topic. Road salt, road salt, road salt. We get so many questions about this, and for good reason. It has dramatic impacts on aquatic ecosystem health. So, who is Ottawa Riverkeeper? Well, we're a charity. We've existed since 2001, and we exist to protect and promote the ecological health of the Ottawa River. And so with that, we monitor for a number of different indicators of the river's health, and we then speak up about what the river needs. If you want to follow along with our work, then one of the best ways to do that is by subscribing to our newsletter. We'll put the link in the chat so that it's right there at the touch of your click of your button. And there's also great ways to follow us on social media. So with that, I think we want to get to the heart of the issue today. Road salt is applied on road surfaces, sidewalks, etc. It is meant and designed to melt ice. And yet we seem to be overusing excessively and sometimes misusing road salt for a variety of purposes. Because of that, Ottawa Riverkeeper has been monitoring levels of chloride in urban creeks and streams to understand what is the impact on those aquatic ecosystems. Just how bad is this issue? But we've also been doing advocacy work and talking to some of the major players who apply road salt. And so we're very excited that City of Ottawa has agreed to be part of this webinar to share what they're doing with their road salt management plan and how they are addressing the proper use of road salt. So before we get to our guest speaker, I will introduce Larissa Holman. To be able to speak about the road salt monitoring work that Riverkeeper has been doing for 5 years now. And recently we released our 5-year road salt monitoring report that shared findings. This is not only for winter monitoring. In fact, we monitor year-round, and there's some very alarming findings coming from it. So Larissa, over to you to share more about the results of the report and the work that Riverkeeper is doing.
Thanks so much, Laura. I'm just going to quickly share my screen so everybody can see the presentation, but of course this takes technical dexterity and I occasionally lack that. So just give me 1 second while I pull up the screen to share, and I'm going to also make sure that it is in slideshow view. So as Laura was mentioning, that's the correct view. I'm just looking to my colleagues to give me a thumbs up or.
You're good.
Okay, wonderful. So as Laura mentioned, this winter, alongside of our road salt reduction week, we also released our 5-year study on the road salt monitoring program that Ottawa Riverkeeper has been participating within the National Capital Region. And so I wanted to share some of the findings and some of the rationale of why we took on monitoring road salt in the first place. It's not something that we've been doing for more than 5 years. So it really is the first 5 years of our understanding of what is happening in the National Capital Region. And why is it that we started this monitoring program? First of all, we learned from other waterkeeper groups as part of the Waterkeeper Alliance. We are in touch with other waterkeeper groups throughout the country and also through North America. And there was a group in Milwaukee, the Milwaukee Waterkeeper, that was doing a road salt program. And, just being in the city of Ottawa and Gatineau and seeing the amount of road salt used, it begged the question, are we seeing similar results in this city? And from working with Milwaukee Waterkeeper, we learned how persistent road salt is, and also that it is not only a pollutant, but it has a fairly significant impact on the biodiversity in smaller urban streams, often an area that is neglected in terms of biodiversity protection, but still a key part of our watershed, and that it has ongoing impacts throughout the year. And so knowing that road salt is something that we apply ourselves and have some control over how much we use, we wanted to better understand what those health impacts look like for the city of Ottawa and Gatineau. The objectives of our program were to assess the salt concentrations in our local streams and identify where there might be problematic areas. This is both within the city itself, but also, is there certain times of year that are worse? What does it look like after certain events? How can we learn more about this? And then, of course, share these findings with the public and hopefully also with decision makers, so that they can also understand the consequences of oversalting and how that does end up in an urban aquatic ecosystem. A little bit of the history of our program. We started this program in 2019. We had only 5 sites at that time, and we collected 80 samples. We continue to expand our road salt monitoring program and have included numerous different adaptations every year. This includes looking at rural areas compared to urban areas. We developed a program where we strategically provided training for snow removal operators and contractors to try and influence those people who are applying the road salt and salt remover and removal, and see if we could see a benefit to having training happening in specific locations in the city. We also began in the winter of 2022 and 2023 the Salt Awareness Week, which is a week every year that we really make road salt a key message that we're sending out and share facts and information and findings to try and raise awareness about the impacts of road salt. And then most recently, we've switched from collecting physical samples to send to the lab. And now instead, we've started using a testing strip after testing its efficacy, and found that it was really a great improvement in terms of cost and speed in getting those results. And so we've really updated our training program to make sure that our community scientists who are out there collecting the samples are using these materials appropriately and getting really great results. And again and again, we see that whenever we quality check the results against the test strips at a lab, they are very, very close. So we have high confidence in these new techniques. Just to give a sense of what we're looking for when we're testing our sampling, the road salts, what happens is when the road salt breaks down and turns into different materials, the toxicity that is associated with road salt has to do with the chloride present in the salt. Chloride is present typically regardless of the type of salt that you're using. And so you'll hear about different kinds of road salt and different makeups. It is the chloride that causes the toxicity, and it is the chloride that we're measuring. And so for it to be safe for a freshwater aquatic system, it has to be below a certain threshold, and so that's 120 milligrams. As soon as it surpasses 120 milligrams, it's called chronic toxicity, which means that a prolonged exposure to water with a concentration above 120, typically for 4 days or longer, will have lasting impacts on the organisms exposed. And then acute toxicity is over 640 milligrams per liter of chloride concentration. And this is for any organism that is exposed to this water. Some are more vulnerable than others, but the impact on those organisms is instantaneous. It doesn't need to be exposed for any length of time. Just the fact of exposure is going to have an impact on that organism. The impact tends to be something that impacts it for a long period of time, often a lifelong impact. And road salt does target those smaller organisms that make up the foundation of a aquatic ecosystem. And so one of the reasons why we see reduced biodiversity is that those pieces that form the foundation of the biodiversity are strongly impacted by road salt. Of course, our work is based on the support of community scientists, and so we wouldn't be able to share all of these amazing results without having these individuals who go out and collect road salt samples throughout the winter in these amazing cold weather after stormfall events or rainfall events. We have grown this program through their remarkable dedication to understanding what's happening in their local streams. And so the program has grown through both the number of individuals who have gone out and collected samples, but also through the number of samples and results that we've been able to get. We collect both conductivity and physical water samples to send to the lab, but now with the testing strips. And we were limited in advance from the number of physical samples we could collect because of the cost associated with sending it to the lab. But now we're able to use those test strips to test more often. Conductivity is also a great indicator of where the chloride concentrations lie. And so it can really help us get a sense of how toxic it is, even if we aren't able to send in a physical copy. But this is just a sample of how well we've been doing in terms of growing the program and the number of locations that we've been collecting samples from. When choosing an area, we have focused on areas with higher densities. We looked at downtown areas. We also target residential areas. And then after that second year, we did target rural areas, but we've reduced those samples, seeing that there's just not the same chloride concentrations in rural areas. And we aim to collect samples from across both Ottawa and Gatineau. One of the things that has remained consistent in our results is that the samples, when averaged throughout the year, there's going to be variation from year to year. 5 years is not enough to get a sense of the trend in road salt usage because weather changes so significantly year to year. But what we have seen is, regardless of what year the sampling has happened in, the average chloride concentrations remain above that chronic toxicity, which indicates that regardless of which city we're collecting samples from or where, the average tells us that most streams in the Ottawa-Gatineau area are being impacted negatively by the presence of road salt. We also were curious about what this meant over the years, and so we actually started asking the community scientists participating in this program to collect samples in the summer months. There were fewer samples collected at that during those months, but we still were able to collect some, and we found that, of course, January, February, March are our highest concentrations of chloride in freshwater streams, but the road salt was still present throughout summer and September and even October. There were still chloride concentrations above that chronic toxicity, and this is likely due to the persistence of road salt of chloride in the natural environment. It doesn't break down. It really needs to be transported out of the system. And road salt, when it's applied, it's not that it breaks down and immediately arrives in the stream. Often there could be places where it's getting held, like in the soils or in the plants. And so over time, when there's a rainfall event and it's transported to the stream, once again, we see that presence of road salt in our freshwater stream. So it has a year-round impact on the aquatic health in the urban areas. And lastly, because we did this work in both Ottawa and Gatineau, we wanted to take a look at the difference between Ottawa and Gatineau, and we found that Ottawa has a higher average amount of chloride concentrations in urban streams. Gatineau less so, but still quite high for considering the fact that it is impacting aquatic health. And, there's a few different reasons for that. One is Ottawa is a much denser city, has a lot more hotspots for transportation. There's larger roads that move through the city that could be located next to the streams where we're testing. But also the city of Gatineau tends to use less salt per kilometer than the city of Ottawa based on the calculations we did from publicly available information. Lastly, with all of this information on all of these results, we did put together our 5-year report on road salt in the National Capital Area. It is available on our website. You're more than welcome to download it, read through it. I, of course, think it's fascinating, but it has a lot more details about the program itself and where we've tested. Through this work, we did come up with 4 different recommendations. They're aimed at municipality, large property owners, and as well as individuals, because we all have a role to play in reducing road salt. What we see is that road salt application is not going to be solved by one individual making a change on their own property. It is a collective effort that will do the best work for protecting the urban streams. But one of, very quickly, the recommendations include using available resources to ensure that road salt application is effective. There's some really great materials out there about when it's appropriate to use road salt, how to use it, how much to use, and for municipalities and larger property owners, that includes the mix of abrasives and temperatures and all of that information. We also would love to see cities and, again, larger property owners like the NCC to develop and regularly update road salt management plans so that they're keeping abreast of what is happening technology-wise and if there are improvements, and have a long-term plan for updating equipment and making sure that they are using the road salt as effectively as possible so that they can reduce the amount that they need to be applying. We also recommend that areas where the road salt is going to be spread close to vulnerable areas such as wetlands or sensitive ecosystems, that there's the road salt application is restricted to ensure that those areas do not become even slightly impacted by the road salt being applied to the streets. And lastly is that everyone needs to become informed about appropriate road salt use to reduce the harm for local streams. So that's a really quick summary of the work that we've done over the past 5 years. This is our 6th year of sampling in the urban areas. Once again, we have an incredible group of community scientists out there collecting information and sampling results. And it's been a really fascinating study, and we're really excited to see the results again this year. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and take a moment to make sure that I have, oh no, here we go. Because I want to turn it over to Chris. So I'm really excited and pleased to welcome our guest speaker from the City of Ottawa, Chris Paquette, who is the Program Manager for Service Planning and Program Improvements. And he has kindly agreed to join us and speak about the City of Ottawa's road salt management and other winter material applications. As an organization that works so much on road salt, we often get questions about what the cities are up to, and it's really wonderful that Chris is able to join us to answer those questions directly himself and share with everyone some of the work that is being done on that end.
Yeah,
so
thank you.
Pass it over to you.
Thanks for that, Larissa. And so I'll just, before Chris begins, I'll give a quick summary there. One thing I heard loud and clear was our gratitude to the community scientists who collaborate with Ottawa Riverkeeper to do that sampling throughout the year, including through harsh winter conditions. I also heard that the impact of excessive road salt use is affecting our creeks and streams, particularly the smallest little critters in there, like dragonflies and salamanders and fish as well, and frogs. And so it ends up having an impact on the foundations of our food web, of our ecosystems. And so that impact is both chronic and acute. There's other impacts. There's about corrosion of infrastructure. There's even our taking dogs out for walks and they get road salt in their paws. But when it comes to the work of Ottawa Riverkeeper, we are monitoring for that impact on aquatic ecosystems. And unfortunately, chloride persists and has really strong impacts. Another piece I heard was about there being many actors involved. So the application of road salt is done by individuals, it is done by businesses, it is done by municipalities and other actors. And so those recommendations do apply to all. And we are really, really keen to hear from City of Ottawa for the innovative practices that they're using, but also just, it is a complex issue. So with that, Chris, we're really keen to hear from you. Thanks so much for being part of the webinar today.
Thanks so much, Laura and Larissa. It really is a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to come to the webinar today and do a presentation. So I think I'll dive right into it, and I'll share my screen here quick and I have a slide deck prepared. Just bear with me for one moment. Everyone can hear me. Larissa, can you give me a thumbs up? I can see you're the only one on the screen. Perfect. Okay, so everyone can see my screen. So I'll give you a brief background on myself before we get into the presentation. I've been with the City of Ottawa for going on 15 years now. I have a background in mechanical design and engineering, and I came to the city and started actually at the bottom. I was a sidewalk operator on the night shift, and I've worked my way through the organization to the current seat that I sit in now. I've been all the equipment that you see running up and down the roads in the city. I've pretty much operated it all through the years, and then I became a part of the salt management side of things at the city, and in the department that I work in now in roads and parking services. That was a big part of my roles through the years here, and it's led me to the position I'm in. And I'm happy to preface the conversation here that, you know, I think we're making some great strides of things I've seen. I'm an outdoorsman to the core. If I can spend time outside, it doesn't matter what weather it is. I was snowshoeing last night with my headlamp on. So, I mean, I'm not afraid to get outside, and I really do enjoy the nature around Ottawa, and spend a lot of time with my kids doing it. What I'm here to talk about today is predominantly the City of Ottawa roads and parking services, operations and material management policies and procedures. I can speak to what we do in the right of way for roads and on the sidewalks. So let me get into the slides. I know I'm not sure. I'm sure nobody tuning in is a stranger to the city, but I wanted to start things off with an overview of our transportation network. It's always jarring to me when you look at the map and how large and vast our city and operations truly are. To service this area, we currently have 17 yards strategically placed across the City of Ottawa. And in those yards, we service the roads, parking, and transitway. We have approximately 535 city operators and over 600 pieces of equipment. Of that equipment, the predominant equipment that's dispensing salt, there's 182 city-owned heavy spreaders. Those are the big trucks that you see running up and down the road with the big yellow boxes on them. And we own about 135 sidewalk machines and also contract out about 50 additional pieces of equipment that dispense material. You can see on the screen here, you know, how diverse our transportation network is. It's quite large. There's 2,500 kilometers of sidewalks, 6,000 bus stops we service. We're up to 65 kilometers of winter maintained cycling network, and we have 18 park and rides and municipal paid parking buildings throughout the city as well. There are three main activities that we perform in the winter. There's snow clearing, treating with material application, and snow removal. These activities are performed on our transportation network, which includes roadways, sidewalk, pathways, and the winter cycling network that I mentioned in the last slide. It's important to understand that there are terms as we move forward in the presentation and throughout the winter season. Snow clearing refers to plowing and pushing the snow to the side of the road. Treating or material application is the use of salt, sand, or grit on our transportation network to treat or prevent icy conditions. And finally, snow removal is the process of removing those snow banks and the encroachments as they begin on the transportation network. We actually just started our snow removal, ramped up our snow removal operations this week. Right after Family Day, we're running 24/7 now to try and get those lanes back. So what guides our work? There are three main maintenance. There are three main governing bodies that guide our work. We have the provincial minimum maintenance standards. So what this is the province puts out a standard to municipalities that gives us a minimum level of service that we have to abide by. We have our municipal maintenance standards, or what we call our winter maintenance quality standards, which is a council approved standard that supersedes the provincial standard. So our standard is actually elevated from what the provincial mandates us to do, where council has approved a standard in which I'm going to get into here, and I think 2 more slides on what our standard actually is, but that's what we prioritize our work around. And then our operational standards, which is our roads and parking internal guidelines and procedures. I'm going to share some of those today as well that interact with both of the provincial and the municipal standards. So overarching what to expect during a winter storm. I'm sure a lot of people have seen this, this graphic over the years. And this is something that we share quite often in our social media posts and on our website. And I felt it was valuable to bring here to show that, you know, there are different levels of standards throughout the city and on different types of roadways and for different conditions. So I can go through the slide one by one, but I think it's fairly self-explanatory. You know, the higher classification roads, things like the 174, the transitway and major arterials through the city, they're going to be treated to a higher level of standard. And as we go down through that network, and you know, you get into the collectors and the residential roads, the service level will decrease and the application will decrease on those roads as well. One thing to keep in mind, and I've done this, a variation of this presentation for a lot of people, is the provincial highways that run through our city. So the 417, the 416 are not maintained by the City of Ottawa. The 174, so from the split heading eastward, is currently maintained by the city. Couple slides ago, I mentioned the maintenance quality standards of the city. So this is one page of our maintenance quality standard, and I wanted to focus on the roadway standard and how we deploy our resources. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor on the screen, but on the upper left-hand portion of the screen, it tells you the road maintenance class, and across the top, then it goes road type. And the next two are quite important to understand what are in these columns. So this is the minimum depth of snow accumulation for the deployment of resources. And this is the depth as per the provincial standard, or that minimum maintenance standard put out by the province. Sorry, that's the part in brackets. The part before the brackets is what the city standard is, and the provincial standard is in the brackets. The next column over is the time to clear snow accumulation from the end of the snow accumulation, or time to treat icy conditions once we've been aware. Again, the city standard is the standard that is in the columns below, and the provincial standard is the information in the brackets. The next important one is what the treatment standard is. So this is a standard that the city has to provide on these roadways at this classification. The best way I can describe this is a day similar today where it's sunny out, there's not many clouds in the air, it is a little windy, but we're not getting any accumulation and we're not on the tail end or the beginning of an event. So a treatment standard, we should be able to achieve what we have as a treatment standard today. So for those road classifications that go all the way from 1 all the way down to 4As, the expectation is that travel lane is treated to a bare treatment standard for the entire portion of the travel lane. As we get down to the lower classifications of roads, so the 4Bs and Cs, you'll notice that 4Bs have a center bare treatment standard, and what that standard is a 2-meter strip of bare asphalt down the center of the road. And you're predominantly going to see 4Bs as your rural cross sections or rural surface treated roads that are not deemed a collector or have the traffic counts to be high enough to be seen as an interior collector in the rurals. As you get to the 4Cs, a 4C is a snowpack standard, and these are your gravel roads and back lanes within some communities in the downtown core. But the majority of your 4Cs you're going to see as your rural gravel roads. As you get into your 5As, Bs, and Cs, those are all your residential neighborhoods and back lanes throughout the city from end to end, top to bottom, left to right. So when we are going out and we're getting into the residentials, that trigger point you'll see is 7 centimeters. And that's a really important one for us that was identified in the last slide. Our beats are designed to meet these standards. We do dry runs in the fall. We do lots of testing on the ability to get through these, what we call our beats or our routes for our trucks and sidewalk machines, to ensure that we have a consistent approach across the city and that we're going to be meeting these standards in most normal conditions and winter events. To the next slide. So I'm going to get into our salt management plan in a little more detail. Our salt management plan is updated annually. It's a part of a document that my team works on in great detail throughout the summer months. Part of this plan is we've actually bolstered our training for all of our supervisors, operators, and contractors. Years ago, I want to say about 6 years ago, we had a very cut and dry training program. And through the last, I want to say 6 years, we've developed more and more in-depth training and identified all of the different parties that are involved in salt management or salt dispensing at the City of Ottawa. And we do specific training for all of our supervisors. They actually get a whole complement of training. If it may be weather, road condition training, understanding how to read our with stations and weather reports. All of our operators that are dispensing any material, it's mandatory training that they go through, and it's 4 hours every season. And we go through all of the different nuances and equipment, housekeeping, and the actual application of the salt on the road. We do this exact same training with all of our contracted equipment and contracted employees. We train them as well. Some of the key components of our salt management plan is our material application policy. In this policy, it covers items such as that maintenance quality standard that I showed in the previous slide. There's a lot of information about our material choices: salt, grit, sand, and winter liquids. And then our rates. Our rates are based off of our pavement temperature and weather conditions. Timing of application is very important. Proper placement of the salt, where we actually place the salt on the road. I'm going to get into a couple slides on that in a little bit, and the use of pre-wetting and what that means. And one thing that we have up in a lot of our yards and equipment is this graphic that we have on the screen, and it resonates actually with myself and most of the staff here at the city. We always tell them the right material in the right amount, in the right place, at the right time. We pulled this out because I felt it would be useful information in this presentation. So this is a small snip of some training that we provide our operators. So we actually have graphics for almost every single cross section of roadway. So you'll see in this, if you can see my cursor in the upper right-hand portion of the screen, the visual. All of our roadways are designed with a crown of some sort on them for water drainage and for the continuity of the asphalt on the road. And we go over all of these in great deal with our operators. We talk to them about the importance of the placement of the salt, when, if they're plowing a 2-lane road, when the application has to happen on the road, opposed to, if you'll see in this upper right portion, if you're applying salt on your pass number 1 and you're coming back to catch the other side of the lanes on your pass number 2, you're going to be plowing off a large portion of that salt. So a lot of this is done through our training, and we do spot check compliance through my group on operators and salting amounts from our initial dry runs that we do in the in the fall. And another important piece of information that you're probably seeing in all these graphics is the ribbon stripping method. This is the application that's used by the City of Ottawa, and it is referenced in our salt management plan and in all the visuals that we train with our operators. The intent is for getting that salt onto the high portion of the road and getting the salt to interact with the moisture and the snow and the ice on the road to create that brine to bear off that road to that surface treatment standard that I talked about in the maintenance quality standards. A big part of our salt management plan is the testing and calibration of our units. We do this in great detail. We do it at least twice a year on every single truck that we have in the fleet. We test them for that ability to achieve the ribbon stripping, and we calibrate the trucks within 2% differential of the expected salt coming off the belts. We also have updated standard operating procedures in place for loading our trucks, general housekeeping in the yards, and the operation of the salt spreaders. Next, I'm just going to talk about the 3 main materials that we use at the City of Ottawa for winter control. Number 1, and I know we're all here to talk about it, is rock salt or road salt. This is the most effective tool we use at this time to achieve our results on the scale in which that the City of Ottawa is doing the maintenance on our roadway network. We use this material down to -18 surface temperature. So I could go down the technical hole here in great detail, but we look at surface temperature and ambient temperature very differently, and our operators and predominantly our supervisors are trained to understand what the difference is between those two temperatures and how to use the material and the right quantity of the material looking at that surface temperature. Right now, we are using a mix of calcium chloride. So when you see, I have on the screen here, pre-wet salt. So in our industry, what we do when we have certain conditions that allow those big trucks that I was talking about that you see go down the road, they have things called saddle tanks on them, and we carry about 900 liters of calcium chloride on board with those trucks. What we do with that calcium chloride is it allows us to get the melting power of the salt below -18 and allows us to use even above -18, closer to 0 degrees Celsius. We can use calcium chloride to get a faster activation on the salt. We have very high-tech equipment in these trucks, and we're able to achieve, as soon as you turn the button on that you're going to be using pre-wet, it automatically reduces the amount of salt by 20%. So the mixture in which we go, if we're using 1 metric ton of salt, we reduce that to 0.8 of a metric ton of salt, and we apply 39 liters of calcium chloride to that 1 metric ton coming off the truck. Another big benefit to this is all of our spreaders, our heavy spreaders are governed that they can only put salt out to 42 kilometers an hour. Some a little higher, but the majority of the fleet are set to 42 kilometers an hour until an alarm goes off in the cab. The calcium chloride is very sticky, and when it is coated onto the road salt when it's coming off of our chutes, it allows for a more accurate application into that ribbon strip that I talked about, and doesn't have the same bounce and scatter as dry salt going down the road. We also use grit in place of sand. What we're using right now is it's a 5mm limestone chip. So it's not an actual crush, it's a chip. So you get elongated pieces of limestone. It's a washed product. It's much cleaner through our equipment. We use this in areas where salt's not permitted. A lot of our sidewalks along NCC trails along the Rideau Canal and the Rideau River are using a high percentage of a grit mix, closer to 100, but we have to keep a small amount of salt in our grit. Any material that is being pulled out of a quarry has a certain moisture content in it, and if we're not putting any salt into that material, you're getting to a day where it's -15. You're going to have in our salt sheds 3,000 tons of rock solid grit that we're not able to put in our trucks. So we put a small percentage of rock salt into that grit to allow it to be fluid essentially in the winter and not freeze into a giant ball in our stockpiles. There's 2 images up on the screen I thought may be valuable when we're getting into the details of our salt management and how we're actually picking our rates. This is a small piece out of our manual for our supervisors that give them, you'll see across this image on the left, pavement temperature, and a very generalized weather conditions that the supervisors use to be able to make their decisions when those trucks go out. I'm not going to get into great detail, and I've always liked this image that I've showed for years of pre-wetted salt and dry salt. So this is a test that was done in a DOT in the US. I don't have it accredited properly, but they took a dry granular of salt and a same weighted pre-wet granular of salt. The pre-wet was calcium chloride here as well, and it shows the ability that the pre-wet or the calcium chloride has to be able to melt through a solid block of ice. So getting into how we make our decisions, and that last slide, that ability to look at that chart and send our trucks out. We have contracted weather services that changes. This is an older slide from 2021, but we changed the contract. I think it's every 3 years. So we have a 24-hour meteorologist on duty. I could call them right now and get an update. All of our supervisors have access to this meteorologist. It assists us in making decisions for upcoming weather events. If you're not comfortable with something coming in on the radar, we have an internal radar portal that comes with this weather service as well. The contracted weather providers come in and do training for all of our staff as part of our salt management plan every fall. And that's another 4-hour training that the supervisors, it's a very interactive training that they go through, and we do scenario-based training with them so that they're comfortable on decisions that are being made day to day. In addition to that, this one I'm really excited about. Been working on this for a few years. We've had road weather information systems at the city for since the early 2000s, but in 2025, this spring, we're actually working through the final stages of what I've been saying to everyone is taking these old flip phones that we have as RWIS stations, and we're getting state-of-the-art smartphones. It's a very dumbed down analogy, but these are very, very, very important pieces of equipment for us. They're strategically located across the city. We have 6 of them. We have subsurface down to 5 meters below the roadway surface of temperature probes and moisture probes all the way up to the surface. We have cameras, accumulation meters, and this is all live data that we feed it for our supervisors, and we hold all this information for historical purposes as well. Our equipment, I've touched on it as we've gone through the presentation. We have digital salt controllers are used in every single one of our heavy spreaders in the fleet. There's a couple examples here up on the screen. We predominantly run EPO Masters and Bosch equipment. All of our units are monitored daily for salt usage, equipment performance, and the calibration is all performed by my team throughout the city. So if supervisors have an issue with a piece of equipment, or if we're flagging it in one of our reports, we go out and investigate that 24 hours a day. Every single piece of equipment in roads and parking services is GPS tracked. We pull a lot of different information out of all of these different pieces of equipment. If the piece of equipment is equipped with a salt spreader, that information is fed directly to our cloud-based database, and we can relay that information to the supervisors that they can self-serve and reports shift after shift. In addition to this, as a check and balance, all of our loaders have digital weigh scales, so we know exactly how much salt is being placed on the trucks before they leave the yard as well. New this season, something I've been a part of for a long time, and I'm really proud to say that the City of Ottawa, from my understanding, is the first municipality to do this in the world, actually. We're deploying salt controllers on our sidewalk machines. In support of my director and our general manager last year, I proposed this project and got the approval to run it on 3 units in the 2023-2024 season, and we got amazing results. What we basically did is take the technology off the heavy spread trucks, and we're installing it in all of our sidewalk machines so that we have much better controls on them. The reason I can comfortably say I think we're the first municipality to do this is that we're actually developing this technology with 2 Canadian vendors and installing it on our equipment. And we're really working together to make this a really successful project. So what we're hoping to do is getting rates and a material application policy similar to what we have on our roadway spreaders for our sidewalk machine spreaders. So some of the alternatives, and I believe me, I've been a part of a lot of them for the treatment of icy conditions. We have a lot of what we have up here is a roadway grader. We use specialized ice cutting blades on those to remove the ice without the use of salt. This is done on a regular basis on our gravel road beats. When we get into the residentials or those class 5 A's, B's, and C's, and we get a high level of hard pack on, we will deploy those resources to cut the ice into those beats opposed to using salt. And again, I mentioned the 90-10 mixture of sand and salt used on some of our roadway and sidewalk classifications as per the maintenance quality standards. And another project I was a big part of as we moved forward was the introduction of the rubber encapsulated carbide blades. We started this in conjunction with Fleet in 2021, 2022. And we've seen fantastic success. This has been we've seen success on multiple levels with this, as far as the ability to clean the roadways to a higher level, which means less salt. And these blades last a lot longer than the traditional blades that we are using before. So we're seeing a reduction in cost as well. Ongoing research into road salt alternatives is always ongoing. And if there's something that hits our desk or something we see, we never put a blind eye towards it. We always put our best foot forward and try to reduce the amount of salt that we use. We abide by the code of practice that the environment management of salt that the the Environment Canada has published. And we've adopted a lot of the salt management principles from that code of practice, and we continue to pilot new and evolving technologies. We've done pre-treated salt, we've done wood chips, we've done beet juice that's always up here. We did, for a while, we were running natural occurring brine from fracking operations in Southern Ontario. But we always, for the scale of the operations that we operate under, we always, rely on that rock salt and calcium chloride mix. Material management, I'm going to go through this really quick. I know we're running out of time here, and I'm trying to burn my way through this, but this is another project I was quite proud of. That building that we have a picture of here is probably, I want to say, one of the best salt storage facilities in Eastern Ontario, or Ontario itself, that we just completed this past spring this past fall in 2024. This is in the west end of the city. This is an extremely sensitive area that this site is built on. This was 4 years in the making that myself and a large portion of my team were in charge of. So the site you see here is everything happens inside. There's not a grain of salt that's loaded or unloaded outside of this facility. It's quite large. It's 80 feet wide and 140 feet long. But all of the operations take place inside of a covered building, outside of the elements, with zero implications to the environment. And I think that's what I had today.
Excellent. Well, Chris, thank you so much. So Chris Paquette from City of Ottawa has shared about the work that the city is doing to manage its application of road salt. And, I really appreciate the transparency and sharing your road salt management plan details with us today, and the steps that you're taking, that ongoing research, as well as you shared at the outset of your presentation. The surface area that the City of Ottawa comprises is huge for a municipality. And it's not only the largest within the Ottawa River watershed, but also the most populous. And so the impact is significant. And so we really appreciate the sharing, but also the strategies and techniques and equipment and technology, all of those different approaches that you're taking to look at how you can more effectively use road salt as one tool in the toolbox. So Chris, thank you very much. We appreciate it. Without further ado, there are many questions coming in, and so I'll hand it over to my colleague, Matthew Brocklehurst, who will pose some of those questions. I doubt we'll have time for all, but thank you everybody for asking questions. You're encouraged to ask even more questions. Si vous avez une autre question, s'il vous plaît, le poser. because we may well have an opportunity to ask some follow-up after the webinar. Over to you, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Thanks, Chris. I'm going to dive right into the questions because I know we're short on time. There's a question for Chris from Madison about the training. And it was about whether the training is provided internally by the City of Ottawa or whether you use external training or programs like the Smart About Salt training.
We have conducted Smart About Salt training in the past, but we found that for our staff, we go into far greater detail than what's provided in that training, and we've provided through our internal learning partners here at the City of Ottawa a comprehensive training program internally.
Fantastic.
And the weather training is all provided by our third-party vendor.
And I'll just jump up to say that a couple of winters ago, the City of Ottawa reached out to Ottawa Riverkeeper, and our very own Larissa Holman is included in some of that training, providing a video talking about the impacts on local waterways. And so we really appreciate that. You know, I think that the awareness raising, yes, needs to happen with everybody who is applying road salt, but certainly the operators are a key piece that, you know, if they can understand those impacts and be aware of that, then you know, it'll improve their practices. So we appreciate that collaboration.
There's a question from Wendy that maybe you'll be able to answer, Chris. It's a question about whether the city encourages or requires similar guidelines that the city applies for commercial or residential properties within the city. How does that interaction work?
Unfortunately, I'm probably not going to be able to answer that. Like my bread and butter is, you know, our roads and parking services, salt management plan, and what we do internally. As far as resources provided to contractors and commercial properties, I don't have much experience in that side of things.
All right, thanks for the answer. Going through again. There's a question from William that in your presentation you mentioned clearing bus stops, but he's noticed that there's sometimes a lot of excess salt at OC Transpo facilities. And so where's the responsibility of the city at OC Transpo facilities, and what can be done to make sure those facilities are meeting the City of Ottawa standards?
So for the city of, like, it's two different entities. We're roads and parking services. We look after the right of way and a small portion of, I want to say, suburban bus stops. For the OC Transpo stations, and I know this is a hot topic right now, it's something I'm not really comfortable commenting on, in the sense that I don't have the resources to understand that part of the city's salt application policy, and I wouldn't want to give misinformation.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm just looking through the questions here. Keep them coming, folks, if you have more questions. We still got a few more minutes to cut through them. There's a question from Juan that they saw mention of salt, grit, and winter liquids, and they're curious what those winter liquids consist of.
Yeah, so the one winter liquid that we currently use is a calcium chloride. So it's a engineered product that we use in conjunction with our salt to meet those lower eutechnic needs. I went through it in the presentation. So we don't do any what we call pre-application, you know, prior to events. So it's more of a reactive approach. And where that calcium is used, it's metered off of our trucks. Everything is calibrated down to the milliliter off of these units. We use 39 liters per metric ton that leaves the conveyor of the truck.
I have a quick question about that as well, but I'm going to jump the queue here because I'm also on the webinar. I was just curious, because pre-wetting is so much more effective than putting dry salt, is there a cost barrier to using it versus dry salt? But why wouldn't you use pre-wetted salt?
So
often than-
we do. We actually use pre-wetted more salt more often. There's certain scenarios when you get to 0 to about -5 where you really need to watch your dew point and humidity, because this is where we train our supervisors and operators to truly understand, because there's a friction coefficient that we can actually bring in the opposite direction if we have too much moisture on the road or on the surface. So in most instances, and you won't even see it if the truck goes by and you're like, I didn't see any calcium come off. We apply the calcium chloride right at the chute, and it comes off that chute and sprays on a tiny little nozzle on the salt. So you're not going to actually see liquid pouring off the truck, but in most cases, there is liquid being dispensed. And the trucks are designed so that a load of material, you'll have enough calcium, about a 20% buffer, a calcium chloride on that truck to get through your entire load.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. I know we're at 1, so I think we'll wrap it up shortly. I do see one question from Priscilla asking about Ottawa Riverkeeper's 5-year report. I'll throw a link in the chat, but if you want to access that information, it's on Ottawa Riverkeeper's website. Just go to ottawariverkeeper.ca/salt. And that's where you can find the report, as well as a campaign we're currently running asking people to sign a road salt reduction pledge to reduce their use of road salt, spread awareness about the issue, and educate themselves about how to use road salt properly. Okay, we're at the end of the presentation. I still see a lot of questions. If you have questions, please feel free to send Ottawa Riverkeeper an email. We're more than happy to answer them if we can, and work with the city to answer them if we don't have that information. And thank you so much for coming to the webinar today. Laura, I don't know if you want to say any final closing remarks.
Sure. Yeah, thanks again to our speakers, to Chris Paquette with City of Ottawa, and also to Larissa Holman with Ottawa Riverkeeper. And thanks again to all the community scientists who have gathered the water samples and taken the monitoring to be able to understand these impacts of road salt. And we look forward to more work on this issue with all of the different parties. And we're particularly thankful that City of Ottawa has joined in today to share. Thanks everybody also for your questions. Please keep those coming in, as Matthew said, because this issue is one that we want to keep working on, and we know that there's big improvements to make. So please ask those questions. That will help. You can also check out the road salt report, sign up for our newsletter, and we will be sharing more about how you can reduce your road salt use. The best way really is to start by being informed. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks so much, Chris.